Hello to people just joining us. Just going to let everyone in and then we'll get started in 1 minute. Okay, 26 people on the call and we'll get started in just a minute. Welcome to everyone who's just joined. See a lot more people coming through the waiting room. Okay, we'll get started. Hello to everyone who's just joined us. Hello to everyone who's about to join us in the waiting room. Hello around the world. Hello to people from London and further afield. My name is James Snellgrove. I'm part of the Systems Innovation London Hub and very welcome to join us this afternoon. We're very happy to have you. This is a 1-hour event. We'll be talking about decentralized economies. This is an event hosted by SI London Hub in collaboration with Token Academy. We have Angela on the call from the Token Academy to join us in the presentation a little bit later. We'll have 2 presentations, so one from Angela in about half an hour, and first of all we'll hear from Joss Colchester, who will explain a little bit about the decentralized economy and why this theme matters in the context of systems innovation. And then after Joss has spoken, we'll hear from Angela from the Token Academy, who'll be delving more into the design of these token economies, and then we'll be learning a bit more detail. This event is live streamed to YouTube and being recorded, and we will pause for questions as we go along, but please feel free to use the chat to say hello, to introduce yourself, and to comment and ask questions as we go along. I'll be keeping a close eye on that, and I'll be putting some links into the chat as well, which will accompany the presentations today. Just to say, this is the first event in a series on decentralized economies, and we expect to have another event in about a month's time. So there's good ways to keep involved in that is to log on to the Systems Innovation Network community site, which I'll post a link to as well. And to look at some of the articles on there. So this is the first of a series of events. Very glad to have you join us. And I will now pass over to Joss.
Great, thank you very much, James. Just let me share my screen here. So, great. You should see. Do you see my full screen now, or just do you see the full screen, James?
I see it now, Joss.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So great to be with everyone here today and be talking on this subject that I think is extremely important. It's one that I've actually been involved in for a number of years now. My background's actually in web technologies, building websites. Sorry, let me find that again. And complexity theory is kind of the combination of complexity theory and that background in information technologies that really brought me to this whole world of decentralized technologies. So I just having a little play around my screen here. Yeah. So decentralizing economies, super important topic. We're going to talk about why it's so relevant in the context of systems innovation. Yeah, you probably know me, Joss Colchester. I'm with the SI London Hub, and great to have Angela here today to be talking on this topic. Just to share some resources, I'm going to be presenting for about half an hour or something like this. As James says, we will pause. I'll pause as we go along. There's a lot of kind of content we'll be unpacking today. This is a pretty complex topic, actually, if you're new to it. So there'll be a lot of new ideas. I'm going to try and go slowly, relatively slowly, so that you can kind of digest those ideas. I'll stop for questions. But just to let you know where this is coming from, it's coming from about maybe I've been researching this subject for maybe 4 or 5 years. And these are some of the resources we have on our website. So the networked economy is kind of the broader context. I'll talk a little bit about that as we're moving into kind of network society and a new kind of economic structure. That's the bigger picture, decentralizing organizations. That's about how enterprises are changing towards a more distributed model. Basic introduction to blockchain that's extremely popular. I think it's the most popular one on the internet. It's watched about 1 million times every 3 months, or 10,000 times a day, actually. So it's very, very popular. It's a really good introduction. It's on our website. And James, hopefully you're going to share the links to all of these. And the token economics is kind of foundational stuff in token economics. So that's where I'm pulling all these resources from. And James will share those. He'll also share today's presentation with you, the slides. Great. And as I say, put your questions in the chat there, and I'm happy to cover those when we get there, when we get the space. So let's start a bit with the why. Why are we talking about decentralized economies? Why is this so important? For those involved in this, that's probably a self-evident question. For those new to this, you may not be so kind of aware of the significance of this whole area. But we can start with the kind of question of how does it help us with kind of key systemic challenges, wicked challenges we have in our economy and finance and so forth. And there's a few of those it really can help with, right, around inclusivity. I'll talk about these as we go forwards, kind of how it can help with these different aspects. So it can help to engage everyone in microeconomies of production and exchange. It can help to create a more equitable economic system and society. And we know we struggle with that. It's really a wicked complex challenge that we haven't cracked in many ways. We don't know how to solve that kind of problem. So it can help to push value outwards to the edges of the network instead of concentrating inwards and upwards. It can also help to create a more sustainable economy. So it can work to value and account for externalities to create more self-sustaining economies. And we know we have a big problem with externalities, and that's kind of at the core of the tragedy of the commons and kind of the unsustainable development of our economies. And I really believe this technology, the ledger system and tokens can really help with reintegrating those externalities so we can start to account for them and manage them and build a more sustainable economy. So those are kind of the high level points on how this can kind of help us with systemic wicked challenges in our economy. But I think there's kind of a bigger picture to this actually that I've been considering for some time. And it's really this revolution that's been ongoing now for many decades, since the 20th century, since the advent of the computer, digital computer, then the personal computer. And at that time, actually, also the introduction of the ideas that we talk about in systems innovation, right? That's where systems thinking came from. Those people who are developing systems theory were also the people building the computers. And it's kind of a twin revolution, I'd say, a revolution in information technology. And we're all quite aware, even the average person on the street is quite aware of how powerful that technology is and how it's really disrupting and transforming society and organizations. More subtle, and maybe something we're less aware of is kind of the revolution in ideas and values that have changed over the past 60, 70 years now. So it's been an ongoing revolution for quite some time. But I really believe they go kind of hand in hand, this new holistic way of looking at the world and the kind of complexity view of the world, looking at those kind of networks, decentralized networks. This changing paradigm, changing thinking that's been rising for the past decades. And what information technology does in terms of reshaping our organizations and the way we coordinate ourselves. So it creates new modalities for organizing human activity through algorithms and information-based networks. And this is a little bit of that history. I'm not going to be talking all day on this kind of high level. I'll just be talking for a couple of minutes, a little bit about this context that helps to frame things, and then we'll kind of jump into more practical stuff. But having a little bit of this kind of historical trajectory of how our organizations have changed with the advent of information technology, and also our changes in thinking from very hierarchical institutions back in the early 20th century to, you know, the rise of the free market and globalization, the corporation and so forth, which had a degree of decentralization to it. We weren't so fixed into kind of nation state hierarchical institutions. And then the kind of world some of us have grown up in, if we're 20 or in our 20s, we've probably just known the kind of platform revolution, the rise of those big tech platforms and how dominant they've become in the world within such a short period of time. And that's kind of the business as usual world we live in now, right? Those tech platforms are some of the most powerful and influential institutions on our planet. And we're saying that actually there's something new that's coming, that's unfolding in this long trajectory of kind of decentralization and decentralized coordination. And we talk about decentralized organizations, DAOs, decentralized economies, and so forth. And that's a little bit of kind of the context of this ongoing disruption and transformation in how we organize ourselves. So kind of zooming in on that, and that's really the thing we're focusing on at the moment, right? This transition from the platform economy, these web platforms that we know today that automate coordination on user-generated networks, to this more decentralized organization built directly on internet protocols. And what that means, what that can mean, right? So there's a lot of potential in that. And it's still a story that's unfolding and yet to be determined how it unfolds. But a lot of people who are involved in that world have the sense that it could create a different world, a more equitable one, inclusive, resilient, sustainable, and so forth. But that's certainly not determined. Could go in many different directions. And I posted this graphic a while back and it kind of resonated with a lot of people. Definitely the industrial age is coming to pieces in some sense. And we're moving into this network society, and that could unfold in many different ways. We see a kind of potential for the platform kind of empire, the big data empires, black box algorithms, or it could be this more decentralized commons, open source sort of world that I think many would want to live in. So that's kind of the game we're playing. I guess I'd say that's an unfolding story as we go along. It's not determined in any sense. So this kind of exists in that context is what I'm trying to get at. And this is a great quote by Joko Benkler. It's not enough to build a decentralized technology if you do not make it resilient to reconcentration at the institutional, organizational, cultural level. You have to integrate for all of those. So it's saying, you know, without a change in thinking, really, without change in kind of approach to institutions, you won't actually get the decentralized world you want to live in. And it's this quote here, such a powerful quote that kind of emphasizes a lot of it. Factory's torn down, but the rationale which produced it is left standing, then that rationale will simply produce another factory. A revolution destroys a government, but the systemic patterns of thought that produce that government are left intact, and those patterns will repeat themselves. And it's really getting to the idea that actually if we don't change our thinking, we don't embed new values into this, you know, the same patterns recreate themselves. And we've seen that before with the platform economy. There was a lot of hope originally that that might be a more peer-to-peer sharing economy. It didn't exactly turn out like that. So it's just saying that there's potential for something different here, but it's not going to happen by itself. It's not going to happen without putting new values, new ideas, and so forth into it. And that's what we're trying to think about here. How do we kind of put, you know, how do we use all this system stuff, and how do we use this technology to enable systems innovation is really what I'm getting at. Yeah, so it's part of this kind of, yeah, I'm just painting the bigger picture. It's part of this unfolding story of the kind of transition into the network society and what that can be, what that can look like. What does it look like in 10, 20 years? Is it this big data kind of black box algorithm world, or is it this open source peer-to-peer kind of economy? And none of that's really determined yet. Okay, so that was pretty high level stuff for sure. I'm going to jump into more practical stuff. If we're actually going to use this if we're actually going to leverage these innovations, these changes, then we're going to have to understand them for sure. And that starts with technology at its foundations. This is a technology revolution. It's really the convergence of economics and technology in new and kind of radical ways. So you do need to understand the technology. It's a tool that makes all of this stuff possible. Without it, we couldn't have kind of large scale decentralized networks like we're actually building at the moment. So yeah, that story is normally told in terms of the evolution of the internet and Web 1.0. Some of us remember that back in the 90s. It's when most of us were introduced to the internet, right? Email. We had those web pages. We had things like Yahoo and directories, and it was called the information superhighway because we accessed information, and that was kind of all we could do there. It was kind of static, dumb internet, and then we had Web 2.0 that we know quite well because it's really the dominant paradigm today, and most of us kind of live a lot of our lives in these apps here. And they're, the great innovation is that they're kind of read-write. We came up with server-side technology so that we could write into databases and then pull that data back out in a dynamic fashion. So when you refresh the page, you got a thing that looked like Facebook feed where it updated with what people were putting in there. So it became a lot more dynamic. It also came user generated, right? That was really the power of it, that we create all these apps on this, pretty much all these apps on this screen, right? We create them. So the big platforms are these kind of algorithms. They're also these data centers, right? We're becoming more aware of this, the kind of limitations of these platforms. Behind the scenes, it looks a lot like this. And we know our data is getting concentrated in these data centers around the planet, and they're owned by big platforms. We know the internet's become more concentrated. It's become the business model, actually the architecture, the client-server architecture that drove that stage in the internet's development has really created these big data centers. It's created these big platforms and so forth. And we have become, society's become increasingly aware of the risks of that and the limitations of it. The question then is, what comes after? Is there a Web 3.0, which is what we're talking about here, a new paradigm in web technologies? And there's many ways of kind of telling that story, right? I've had to explain to many people what blockchain is and what all this stuff is. And my easiest explanation is that it's those cloud computers that we all know, but they're just decentralized clouds now, right? Instead of a whole pile of computers linked up together in a data center owned by Facebook or whoever, it's now a whole pile of computers providing the same computing environment, cloud computing environment, but it's done in a decentralized fashion. A whole pile of computers, mine, yours, whoever else's, can be incentivized to provide that same computing environment that you have in those data centers. So it's kind of like a big decentralized computer. Filecoin is an example of that. It's a storage protocol, quite a successful one. It's quite a large economy now, where people are incentivized to provide storage capacity in devices like this or any other kind of device to that network. And in that way, they can create a cloud storage environment, right? Where we can you connect up all those devices, you incentivize them, and you have that same kind of storage environment that Facebook or Google has. You've now done it in a decentralized fashion. So no one really owns it, you just got that set of protocols. And anyone can earn tokens by providing storage to the network, while those who use the storage space pay for it. So you can see a very basic economy going on there already, and that very basic economy of incentives, of exchange, production, exchange of a resource is actually functioning to maintain a functional system, storage provision in a decentralized way without there being a centralized entity. And then we can create open source software that runs on top of this decentralized computer. And that's starting to get to interesting stuff. Because we can start to own our own data, right? With these decentralized computers, you're just given a little space on this computer that you own, and you can own the data there. And with open source software, we can start to see the algorithms and how they work. So it's a very different kind of computing context, should we say, to the one that we looked at there with Facebook. This is one where we can own our own data and we can see these algorithms. So it's a very different system where data can be accessible for public services, where algorithms can be transparent and open to change. And that's really, I mean, we're not talking about technology today, so we're not going to go too far into this, but it's absolutely critical to tackling any kind of critical systemic challenge we face going forward. The extraction of our data into private data centers and the operation of key digital services through black box algorithms stalls progress on critical challenges. Many of us aren't really even aware of kind of the cost of doing this, all this data being sucked up and not being made available for public use in the way that it really needs to be. Data is our most powerful kind of tool. The internet is our most powerful tool for doing the kind of changes we need to do, and data is critical to that. And without that being open, we can't really use it, and also the algorithms, right? Black box algorithms that are running really key public infrastructure, because these are now public infrastructure, social media and so forth, Amazon and so forth. It's almost like a public infrastructure. They're being run by kind of black box algorithms. Creates a lot of problems. So this data that we produce is critical for us to be able to manage ourselves and the networks we form part of in a world where systems have grown so complex that we can no longer afford centralized coordination at scale. So we actually need this data to be able to, you manage complex systems, all complex systems manage themselves through information exchanges peer-to-peer in different ways. And that's really what's needed to manage our world. But those information exchanges are flowing into centralized systems and kind of getting stuck there, right? And then that means we're stuck in the old world, still dependent upon centralized organizations like our governments and so forth to manage these systems when they're actually incompetent of doing that, because you can't really when these systems have got that complex. So we can incentivize these computers to securely store and validate data and transactions on this computer. So this is the sort of stuff we can do on this computer. And that means we can have ledgers, which are records of value, of ownership, and of exchanges, of transactions. So this is starting to get pretty interesting, because now on top of all this, we can start to build economies, right? Just like the platform economies we have today of eBay or Uber or whatever it is, this software can create scalable user-generated economies without these guys. And that gets very interesting. If you don't have that platform in the center there, things start to look a bit like this. These big decentralized networks of peer-to-peer exchange. And this makes it technically possible for people to set up their own economies without dependency on centralized entities, as in the past. And for thousands of years, we really have depended upon centralized entities for providing the trust we needed to be able to set up economies of exchange to transact with each other. And now we have like a computer, really, this decentralized cloud that can do this, that is incentivizing people to maintain that security, those ledgers and so forth, in a way that we can trust it, we can transact, and we can create these large economies of exchange, peer-to-peer systems. So yeah, I see many comments in the chat there, James. Are there any quick questions? I'll just take a very short pause.
Thanks, Joss. I'm not sure they're quick questions, but there are definitely some interesting questions coming through.
I can imagine.
So a question here about, I think about around ownership, there's quite a few questions, and kind of, I think power dynamics might be in the sort of front of people's minds with things like the Twitter news and Elon Musk as well. This question here from Bella Ngo. How exactly did we own the data before Web3? So I guess getting to the point of the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 and data ownership, how that might be different in the future. Think thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, we know who owns our data at the moment. It's really kind of sucked up, isn't it, by Google and Facebook. And then it's monetized, right? So it's really put to, it's not that you can't access it. It's not that, well, it's really that it's being used for a particular end. The whole system is set up to generate, like data is being set, systems being set up to suck up that data and use it for selling advertisements and so forth. So it's not really set up to be used in the way that we need to use it. In this decentralized world, you have this computer and then you have little wallets, and you have places where you can store your data securely and have secure access to it, and then choose to make that publicly available. And it is kind of out there in this cloud, right? This decentralized cloud. So you can choose your kind of options about, do I want to make this accessible to whoever, you know, for whatever reason. So in that sense, you own it, and it's not being by default used in a different system for a different purpose, for making money for the platform. You can choose how you use it. Okay, so I don't think we have too much time right now. Let's stay going. Decentralized economies. Yeah, this is what it's about, right? That's just the kind of computing infrastructure, and it's absolutely critical. We couldn't have these kinds of economies at this scale without that technology, so we do need to understand it. Because such technology has fundamental implications, it's important to revisit what exactly we mean by economies. We definitely, in the industrial age, we got stuck in a certain paradigm about what economics is and how we do it, and central banks and all of this sort of stuff. And when you get something as fundamentally transformative as this, you need to kind of start again with the question of what exactly is an economy. And at its core, it's about value and the exchange of value between people, the production, exchange, and consumption of value, just like these guys here producing their bread and exchanging it with this lady who's going to consume it, and they're going to transact. And that's an economy. And it's really about whatever we care about, right? It's always relative to what we care about. And then whatever we care about, we can build an economy around that. So water and food have value, security has value, accurate information ecosystems, good governance decisions have value. So you can actually build economies around all of these things, because they do involve the production and exchange of value. And we can use this decentralized model to create economies of peer production around all of the things we value. For example, water. If we take the provisioning of water in a rural village in Africa, we could do that in a centralized fashion. We could set up an organization, an NGO or something, or a company or whatever it is, through investment, and it would be owned by a few people, and it would typically be for profit. There would be professionals working for that organization to set it up, lay the pipes, and ultimately they'd be providing some kind of a product. And it would look something like this, because this is what most of our ways of organizing institutions look like. They're centralized, right? In the sense they're mass produced, mass production. But we could sorry, one second. We could also do this in a decentralized way, right? That would result in a very different approach. We could set up a token economy where anyone can earn tokens by providing water, and that anyone could access that water by paying in tokens. So it's actually doing exactly the same as we saw there on the compute storage with Filecoin, but now we're looking at the provision of water and saying we could decentralize that. We could turn it from a centralized institution into, actually, it's a marketplace. That's what's going on here. Token economy is a kind of marketplace, which means anybody can plug into that market and provide that resource, and anyone can come in on the other side and buy it. And that decentralizes the production. It's no longer dependent upon those few professionals who are managing that water system. This can now be done by anyone. that very much changes the paradigm. Or take, for example, the waste management in a city. We could have a decentralized system where a token economy is created for collecting waste. So outside my house, I come out every morning and there's rubbish on the street. Actually, it looks a bit like this. Even here in London, where we have a pretty good waste management system, most of the world doesn't have a good waste management system. But even here, you'll find plenty of waste on the streets. When I walk past it, I'm not actually incentivized in any way to do anything about it, right? That's someone else's job. I pay my taxes, and then that organization, the public admin here has to go and pick up the rubbish and so forth. So I'm kind of dependent upon a few people to pick up our waste. And they probably do the best they can, but they're not there everywhere. We're able to pick up all the waste, right? So we could all be incentivized to collect it, right? And that's, if we created a token for this, right? And then we're decentralizing it. I could get paid tokens for picking up that waste outside my door. And everyone else could too. And actually, you're there radically decentralizing things and creating a very different economy. And it works very well for kind of decentralized challenges like that, right? Centralized institutions don't work very well when you have a decentralized kind of complex problem like people dropping litter everywhere. Could be for the production of energy. It could be the production of anything, really. So this is what energy looks like at the moment, centralized thing. We could be incentivizing anyone to set up their solar panels and so forth. So this has potentially many advantages. So I say potential all the time because it is actually just potential. You have to see how these things play out in practice. But potentially, you can remove overhead costs. You haven't got this centralized entity or many of the things they do. Some of them you probably still need. You can harness the productive capacity of the many instead of the few, like me picking up that rubbish in front of my house instead of walking past it. And people can set up their own micro economies, right? So once you've got this computer out there, once you've got these protocols, it can be very easy for us to start to set up our own economies, to start to say, hey, we want to look after our park or whatever it is. And there's people creating value there. There's people planting trees or mowing the lawns. And there's other people getting benefit from that, our little community around the park. And we're creating tokens to make that happen, incentivize those people to mow the lawn and do the planting and so forth. So you can start to set up these microeconomies around the things that people value instead of necessarily needing an institution to do that for us. Because everyone will be able to set up their own economies with this technology, decentralized economies can create new forms of public infrastructure that is owned by the members, similar to a cooperative. Right, so if we wanted to sort out our park and we all got together and decided to create some tokens for that, that would essentially be owned by us, right? We would create those tokens. We'd own that little economy there instead of it being owned by someone else, and which normally creates something of an extractive model, right? People come in, they build a building or they lay down a bridge or whatever it is, and there's normally investors behind that, and there's a few investors behind that, and they're doing it for profit. This could be actually the people in that community getting together and say, we need this, and we have this technology of token economics to actually make it happen ourselves. So yeah, maybe I stay going for the sake of time. How much time do we have, James? Oh, 5:30. Yeah, I'll stay going for the sake of time. We'll get some questions at the end. So yeah, that's about the decentralization underneath of the technology and what it does in terms of algorithms and data. And we just talked about economics there and how can decentralized economies and change the structure of the production and exchange of value in our economies. But we can also kind of go further than that. We can start to create economies because we've got these things called tokens, and tokens are very, very interesting little things. And we can start to create new forms. We can start to represent new forms of value in our economic systems and start to create more full value economies. So what do I mean by full value economies? At the moment, we have a kind of a monodimensional economic and financial system. Right, it's kind of the fiat currency thing we know well. which creates a divide. This kind of creates a divide between public and private values, the private sector and public sector. So let me just show you what I mean by that. This is what our economies look like. They're kind of transactional, right? You give me a product and I give you some money for that, and you can buy any products with that money. But when it comes to public infrastructure, that's not really included here, right? That's actually an externality that involves externalities, right? The environment or social capital and so forth. And that's actually managed by governments in a centralized way, or public institutions in a centralized way. And if we had tokens which can represent different forms of value, well, then you can start to integrate those into the economic system in new ways. And then you can have this decentralized economy actually as a way, a peer-to-peer way of managing different resources, different capital that you have in society, in the economy. Essentially the things that we value. So digital token is a quantified unit of value recorded on a decentralized computer. These represent the ownership of an asset or the access to a service provided by an economy. Sorry, little computer problems there. So these units could represent any form of value, which is different to the forms of value, the representations of value that we have at the moment, right? The fiat currencies. These are specific, and they can represent anything. Like a token can represent likes on social media, or transport miles, electrical units, security services, so on and so forth. And when you can represent those individual things, you can start to create particular economies around them. For example, if we take here, hopefully this will illustrate what I'm talking about. If we take here healthcare, healthcare is kind of a public service, and it's a very expensive one, costs a lot of money. Our governments can be trillions if you live in America, or billions. But we could turn that money into tokens, health token, to create a decentralized economy around the creation of health. So we start to create an economy where people are paying to make unhealthy choices, and they're gaining tokens to make healthy choices because they're maintaining this shared resource of public health that's costing so much money. So unhealthy choices and goods and activities would pay into the token funds. So maybe if you drove a very diesel guzzling car that polluted the air, you may be paying in health tokens. Well, anyone else could earn tokens providing public health services and making healthy choices, right? So if you're looking after your body and so forth, if you're eating healthy food, you're less likely to end up in hospital, you're less likely to cost everyone a lot of money in healthcare services, public healthcare services. So this allows us to use informational signals and incentives to give people the information as to the consequences of their actions, so as to create a self-sustaining system through feedback loops, right? We can have health tokens associated with different products and so forth. And then they're seeing that, instead of just seeing a price tag on these things, they're seeing, oh, well, this is actually adding to that economy. I'm actually creating value there, and other activities are taking from it. And you get that same decentralized system for the management of that resource, that public resource. And yeah, that's what it might look like in terms of a little diagram. In reality, it looks a lot more complicated than that. I'm going to stay going for the sake of time. Starting to account for externalities. So it's really, we're accounting for externalities here is what we're doing, both positive and negative, to create full value economies. And we can do that because of that nature of tokens to be able to represent different forms of value. Our economies become multidimensional, accounting for different forms of value, really in the way that's needed, or the way that's kind of significantly lacking. We're able to account for those, right? And that's really the thing that's missing at the moment. We know we're not properly accounting for social capital and ecological capital and so forth. So we don't manage it properly. And we can also, we'll be working for many different jobs, right? When I walk out the door and pick up that rubbish on the street, I've got a little job there, right? Whilst I'm manning tokens, and I've got a little job picking up rubbish. I'm part of that economy. So it would no longer be, I just have one job in one economy. I'd actually be part of many. This is maybe another example of organic farming and how that could be tokenized for the farmer to manage the commons, the ecosystem, and be remunerated for that. So because these tokens are programmable, maybe I won't go into this too much, they could represent our values in a much more granular way than a dollar. It doesn't really express anything. A veggie token, you can't spend this token on buying meat, expresses your values, right? And if we value that token very little, then it says society doesn't care about whether we eat meat or not. If that token was worth a lot of money, if it was worth more than your average token for which you could buy meat, then it's actually starting to incentivize people to become vegetarian and get rid of that activity in society. So in this way, our values start to become expressed through the tokens, through the economy, and the way that they really aren't at the moment with the industrial model. So we have a much closer integration between our values and how those are kind of expressed in the economic flows that we have, and we really start to be able to design economies, which Angela is going to be talking about. It's what they do at Token Engineering Commons and Academy and so forth. So we get actually the capacity to really design economies in the way that we've never done before. Okay, I'm going to wrap up there. That's hopefully you've got the idea of why this is so important and how it can really enable. It's a structural transformation, so it kind of gets to the bottom of the iceberg, right? We're able to incorporate new values and change the structure of our economy, which is really that bottom level of the iceberg. And if we did that, then we would very likely really get these outcomes that we want in terms of inclusivity, equity, sustainability. They'd almost be built into that sort of economy instead of us trying to achieve them based upon an economy that isn't really set up to create them. Okay, we've got 60 comments there already. I'm going to wrap up because I want Angela to have some space to talk, and hopefully some questions at the end too.
Over to you, Angela.
Okay, great. I'm reading through the comments in the chat. I like it very much, and you're raising very important questions. Let me now share my screen and talk a little bit about how to design such systems. Okay, some words about myself. I'm founder of the Token Engineering Academy, and token engineering is basically an emerging new engineering discipline, probably the youngest after software engineering was established in the 1960s. And this is about the design, validation, optimization of these token-based economic systems that have been so holistically explained by Joss in the first part of this talk. Our mission at the TE Academy is education, certification, and matchmaking. And some facts about the Academy. We started in 2020, so it's an early educational organization, but already had 900 participants in our training programs and currently building TE Fundamentals, the first comprehensive education and certification program. We already collected more than 1,000 signups, and the backgrounds of people who are interested in that are economics, math, physics, finance, data science. It will be live in Q3, and we are running weekly programs. This also points us to the disciplines that are necessary for token engineering in building these systems. It's about encoding the values I just was discussing, and to us, generally, token engineers, we envision this discipline. The mission is to build out systems that, rather than trying to optimize humans with incentives, trying to manipulate behavior, try to provide the maximum degree of freedom for the actors in the system while preventing dangerous conditions. how can we design, or what do we need to design these cryptoeconomic systems? Here's an overview on the disciplines that are relevant for building such systems. It starts with computer science and cryptography, of course, since we are talking about cryptographic systems. Then, of course, we need economics, game theory is very important here, and operations, research, management science in observing and evaluating the evolution of the networks here. Industrial and systems engineering, because we can simulate those systems, and we'll get to that in a moment, why this is important. And since we have this layer of this records of all the transactions, we can apply AI, optimization and control theory to stabilize or balance these systems or optimize these systems. And then, of course, we are not talking about robotics here, about mechanical systems. We are talking about socio-technical systems. So we have the human layer. We need political science and governance. Now we see these decentralized autonomous organizations emerge. So how to steer them? What about decision-making power? What about driving? What about defining the values and purpose in these systems? We need psychology, decision science, behavioral economics, and of course, philosophy, law, and ethics. And token engineering is about the applied cryptoeconomics. Now, why do we need this? If we take the example of Bitcoin, you have on one hand the users with a value proposition. What's the benefit of using Bitcoin? You have global permissionless transactions, no intermediary. Anybody can open a Bitcoin wallet and account. You have low fees. And that was the starting point for the user's value proposition. Then on the other hand, we have the miners. The miners are the agents who keep the system secure with a consensus mechanism. You might have heard about proof of work, solving the double spending problem, and make this record of transactions safe. Actually, Bitcoin has never been hacked since 2008 without any central authority securing it. And in order to make it attractive to secure the systems, we have fees that are rewards for the miners, and also governance powers for the miners. If they take part, if the system is forked and they decide to either use the old system or shift and move to the new version of the system, this is actually governance power. So what should be implemented, what is supported by the miners. So here we have the two actors, main actors in the system. A little bit further down the road today, we also see that there's a new value proposition for the users. It's value accrue. Instead of using Bitcoin as a means of exchange, as money, cryptocurrency, it's rather a store of value, because the value increased so heavily. People stopped to use it as money, like payment. It's rather an investment instrument, an asset to invest in. And there's actually an element in the mechanism that supports this. This is the halving mechanism. It's implemented in Bitcoin. Every around 4 years, the miner reward decreases, meaning the amount of new Bitcoin that is minted decreases, and this should also push the token value. So you see, we have several mechanisms, the consensus mechanisms, this deflation mechanism, the fee, and this all contributes to the evolution of the system. Now, in addition to that, most recently, due to DeFi, we have even more layers of usage of functionality implemented on top of Bitcoin, which is, for example, the decentralized exchanges or any exchanges which enable trading and speculation. You have borrowing and lending using Bitcoins, or you have derivatives and Bitcoin used as a collateral. And of course, this creates new dynamics. Now, how to steer, or how do you even predict value accrue if there's trading and speculation, for example, or how to drive a broad usage if the value accrue is so high that people, the users, are basically incentivized to hold Bitcoin instead of spending it and using it. Now here we have various mechanisms and non-linear effects between the components and the mechanisms in this system. And that's why we address the design and optimization of such systems with methods from complex systems engineering. So some examples. These systems, as I mentioned, consists of subsystems. We have the layer of token utility in transactions, plus the layer of using it to borrow and lend and earn profits. And these layers are interconnected and interdependent. The systems at the same time are dynamic. They change over time, so you can't analyze just a snapshot of it only. You can apply controls, like you create feedback loops to guide and steer the systems in a specific way. But you have to analyze from different perspectives, and the systems are layered. Like we have the macro layer, the monetary policy, like the deflationary element or halving, or the micro level, the behavior of an individual actor and how this individual actor is incentivized. And we have to analyze these various layers and how the things that we observe at one layer are effect and consistent at the level above or below. Now, the fascinating thing is that we can create purpose-driven systems. We can optimize in a particular direction. We can steer the systems towards a certain purpose. And that can mean that we can, like for the major changes we have today, how we consume or distribute resources on this planet, for example, we know that these systems are still very much, problematic and incomplete in, for example, accounting for negative externalities like CO2 emissions. So we all know basically that we won't be able to fight climate change if we don't get the economic incentives right. Now imagine we could build economic systems to optimize towards the purpose of CO2 reductions. And I guess just as examples where try to explain and give examples how this can happen. Now, I've brought one example that is not just imagine if, it's rather this is actually taking place, and it's very much about coordination. And I think some of the questions in the chat pointed also in that direction. What about this value thing? What about the purpose? Do we have to agree on the global scale now? What is value for us? And then how to take into account different cultures. Is it again so that the builders of a system are imposing a certain culture or defining value for the rest of the world? Now, let's take a look how this, like building coordination and implementing a direction in a system, can look like. Imagine we have a challenge like how to distribute funding to open source projects using crowd intelligence instead of centralized decision making. And to do that not only on a local scale within a community where we have relationships, where we can discuss and negotiate on values. Imagine we try to implement this on a global scale, even without any personal relationships, without any conversation, in a trustless systems. Because remember, these systems have been originally built to work without any intermediaries, without any trust necessary, without even the parties need to know each other. Okay, here's an example. Gitcoin, it's a crowdfunding platform founded in 2017. And it's made to support building and funding the open web, meaning open source software and public goods together. And one element is Gitcoin grants. This is crowdfunding. You can, number one, set up a grant in case you are looking for support and funds. And number two, you can, as an individual contributor, you and I can support a particular project via tokens, via sending donations, basically. And these has been numbers in grants round 11. Grants round 11 was back in 2021, and there were already 1.6 million raised by the community. So this is significant. And the grants round takes place pretty much every second month. Almost 1 million in an additional funding pool. I get to that in a minute. And almost 500,000 contributions from all across the world. And here we have three parties of stakeholders. We have, number one, the grants, the projects looking for support and funding. Number two, the contributors, the individual people who want to support a project, sending individual donations. And then we have the matching pot. And the matching pot is basically funded by larger organizations. In our case, since this is crypto land with open source projects, of course, these are parties who are interested to support and grow this field, meaning these are crypto protocols that are sending funds or reserving funds for the distribution that is then based on crowd intelligence. And here are some examples what the grants are all about. This is, for example, DevNode. It's infrastructure, it's nodes that can pretty much be provided by individuals. It can be a wallet, like the accounts in the system. It's Ethereum in Farsi, make it accessible in other languages than English, or it's an individual software engineer looking for support and help me training, help me growing my knowledge, or Zero Knowledge Podcast is a pretty sophisticated piece of infrastructure, or even Circles UBI for a universal basic income. So what my message is here, we have really a broad variety of projects and initiatives to support, and there is no, apart from this should be open source and this should be public good, there are no other criteria. So it's open to the, let's say, bottom-up intelligence, what should be supported. And then on the other hand, we have the unique contributors and the additional matching funds. And these are the numbers of just recently in April, 4.6 million distributed already via this mechanism. I could dig into the algorithm, but probably we don't have enough time for that. The important element here is it's not, the algorithm works in a way that the donations you receive as a project matter for the additional funds you get. However, it's not only the size of donations, because then you might have just a whale supporting a project with a huge amount, and then this project gets additional huge amount from the matching point. Instead, the algorithm is designed in a way that the number of individual contributors matters equally, meaning if you not only have a huge sum of donation, but you also have a huge number of individual supporters, then you get more on top of it from the matching part. Here's also some examples of the network evolution. This is what we can track also and monitor. What about the increase of the number of individual contributions? Do we have a concentration in particular grant? How can we counteract and ongoingly, continuously optimize the algorithm? Now, the important thing here is the great opportunity that I'd like to highlight is building crypto economies is about, we can implement purpose-driven economies, like here to support a bottom-up development of projects, all supporting the overall vision of open source software. And we can implement algorithms that steer the system in a way that we have global coordination. And this is the really new element in crypto economies that I'd like to highlight. Final comments. You can learn token engineering. There is this program of how to design these new systems, a comprehensive learning program, the first one that is available, and signups are open. Reach out to TE Academy, tokenengineering.org, in case you are interested.
Amazing. Thank you, Angela. Such interesting insights there. I think I'm going to have to watch this recording back myself to get my head around it all. But you know, plenty of good comments coming through in the chat as well. Please do show some love for Angela and Joss in the chat to say thanks very much. Thank you to you both. Fantastic way to kick off this first event in a series of decentralized economies. You can find our next event on this topic on the 26th of May. You can find that on the Systems Innovation Network website. Joss has put the link into the chat, I believe, and we can do that again. If you'd like to get in contact with Angela or reach out, I believe her details are on the screen there. So Token Engineering website and the little scanning item, I forgot what they're called now, those little scanning buttons, but you can reach out to Angela via that. We've loved having you today. Thank you so much. Thank you for the comments. If you want to continue the conversation, you can head over to the Systems Innovation community platform as well. We have a forum there on the economy and economics. So you can always continue conversation there, and we will see you next time on the 26th of May. Keep an eye out on that link, on the events link, to find out more details about that and how to sign up. Anything else, Joss, or we shall end it there?
Maybe we just give a couple of minutes if anybody wants to ask a question. Unfortunately, this is a bit of a broadcast instead of a discussion, but if anybody wants to, has a question, happy to stay for a couple of minutes. If you want to leave, you're welcome to. We've hit the end of the hour, but yeah, anybody who wants to say. I'm sure, Angela, you could stay for a couple of minutes. Yeah. Feel free to, I'm not sure if there were plenty of questions in the chat there, right? But if you want to unmute yourself and try a question, you're welcome to.
It was kind of hard to keep up with the questions in the chat. They were coming thick and fast. I think there was some questions around kind of the unintended consequences for decentralized economies, and I think, Angela, you were getting at them there in terms of how do you sort of build purpose into some of these tokens as well, and who gets to decide what those kind of ethics and values we may be building into some of these tokens and various forms of economies. So I don't know if you and Joss maybe have a few more comments on that just to share.
I'm happy to take that. Unintended consequences and just negative side effects of the systems we've designed. There are two important layers here. One is the governance. So there is it's basically an entirely new field of how can you translate governance to these systems and also build governance like ownership, accountability, responsibility into these systems. And governance is pretty much still a very important social layer. So the goal is not to, fully optimize governance. It's rather instead, how can we implement the right processes and the right methods to govern these systems. Again, it's on a global scale, how to deal with it. And so this is the social layer. And then on the very bottom layer, the algorithms themselves, we clearly see no algorithm is perfect ever. The good thing is that we have a much better picture, like the network graph that I've showed, we can analyze these systems in a much more granular way compared to today's economic systems, and detect problems and discuss problems and bring it to the top, to the governance layer, or have machine learning pipelines to flag, let's say, suspicious or potentially malicious actions early on.
I think when you present the theory of all this, it can look like a kind of silver bullet solution, and oh, it's going to fix all the world, you know. But in reality, it's not like that at all. I just Eve posted a good comment here. Before moving to a fully decentralized token economy, we need to understand the impact economy along the full value chain among stakeholders, impact accounting, polycentric governance, and so forth. So in a way, this just kind of builds upon a lot of things that have already happened and are already out there in the world that we're trying to figure out, and we have to figure out before like this will work, you know. So and governance and so forth. So people often think, oh, we're going to go into a decentralized world and so forth, but and it'll be automated and it'll solve all these problems of bad people in the center. And it's not really like that. It's kind of like we shift the automation up a level, right? The governance is still there. We still need the governance. We still need the high level stuff up here. So, and it's still part of the real world. When you present it in a theoretical framing like we did, then it looks like, oh, it's all figured out. But actually, it's part of this big, messy, complex global economy. And there's all sorts of stuff we still have to figure out. And it's part of, you know, the impact economy and figuring out how we do assessment and valuation and all this stuff. So it's a complex system indeed.
Great. It might be worth wrapping up there, Joss. I can't see any other questions come through at the moment. There is obviously a lot of...
Is token engineering making things on a network or making new networks?
Both. Of course, it's about making the network itself, building the networks, enabling these networks, build the technology as well as, again, the mechanisms, the incentives. And then at the same point, of course, it's making new things in networks, because these systems, like they are ever evolving. We have potentially any individual actor impacts the systems, can change the system on purpose or by accident. So it's an ongoing challenge to optimize these systems that they keep their promise, right?
And what do you think, Matt? What do you think are the dangers of decentralized token economies? Yeah, I'm sure there's many, but if you just take you know, Bitcoin, right? It's chewing up a lot of electricity and it's burning out a lot of CO2, and we aren't really able to do much about that, right? So you can design, if you're starting to launch, you know, DAOs and decentralized autonomous organizations, it really matters how you engineer them, right? Which is what the token engineering is about, getting good engineering. If you engineer it badly, it's going to go a bit crazy, and getting the right values into it, right? Otherwise, again, it's going to be unsustainable. It's going to go off the rails. And I think of it as just kind of like the evolution. It's an agent, right? A decentralized autonomous organization. And we've had many agents in the past. A corporation is an agent. And we know the problems we've created with these global corporations when we put the wrong values into them, right? They've done a lot of destructive things in our worlds. And a decentralized organization like Bitcoin or the many others that we're creating are really just extensions of something like the corporation or the nation state or those kinds of agents, that we're just automating them to a much greater extent. So they have the same kind of problems. So if you put the wrong values and you design the thing in the wrong way, the incentives in the wrong way, it can create highly destructive behavior in the way that, you know, look at our corporations do, destroying rainforests and so forth. So certainly that's one, and there's many others. And that's why you have to design them properly, and the engineering and understanding of complex systems is so important. Should we wrap up there, James?
Yeah, I think it's a good point to wrap up. Yeah, fascinating session. Thank you, Joss. Thank you, Angela. Thank you for those who stayed a little bit longer. yeah, and we will continue the discussion on the 26th of May.